The heels of men's shoes hitting the gray asphalt played with a rhythmic echo in the narrow streets. An athletic brunette named Eugene resolutely approached a fashionable hotel with the common name Eden. Despite the slight excitement, the guy outwardly kept himself confident and, stepping over the threshold with his left foot, entered the building. He was immediately met by a short man of strong build and, without saying a word, invited him to follow him with a gesture. Soon the young man found himself at a table opposite the future employer in a richly furnished room. Mikhail Ivanovich was a man of about 50 with absolutely gray hair and severe light gray, almost white pupils of cold eyes. His thin lips moved, and the innkeeper spoke quietly and measuredly. "Eugene, I take it you are a student. And do you need a job?" After receiving 3 nods of confirmation, the man continued, "I'll put it into action right away. Briefly and clearly. We are looking for a person who will monitor and check the rooms after the guests have left. In case of any moments, immediately report to either the cleaners or Andrei," and he gestured at the bald strong man. "In fact, the work is not dusty. Make a round at night once an hour and check the numbers. But I demand strict confidentiality. You understand that the guests of our hotel are far from poor and famous people. They really do not like when their personal life is advertised. You will also have keys to all rooms. The work is not dusty. Watch, report, and most importantly, be silent. In fact, you are Andrei's assistant, and you are listed as a security guard. And if you agree, from the same day, you will resolve all issues through him. Moreover, the payment is more than acceptable just to make rounds and keep your mouth shut. If the conditions suit you, the contract is on the table and you can start working from tomorrow night." Yevgeny was about to open his mouth and ask a question, but Mikhail Ivanovich unceremoniously interrupted him. "You probably didn't listen to me carefully. Andrew will answer all your questions. Personally, I have no questions for you. I have reviewed the resume and you are a perfect fit." Shania swallowed drily and slowly agreeing nodded. Andrei immediately invited him to another table to fill out documents. Among the short list of duties, one single line stood out in red: mandatory confidentiality. Without thinking twice, Eugene signed the contract, and immediately the manager called him to follow him. It was the fastest interview in the guy's life. Unlike his boss, managing director Andrei turned out to be a rather sociable and cheerful person outside the office. He spoke in detail about the duties of an assistant and mentioned several times that there were serious problems when divulging guests' secrets. "Shen, you understand very well that serious people have certain moments that it is desirable for no one to know about. For example, the presence of a mistress or lover." Without lowering his smile, Andrei said, "On the go they keep their secrets like the apple of their eye. I wouldn't want a promising medical student to go missing because of some stupidity." From this phrase, Eugene felt uneasy. Especially from the cold and unchanging smile of the manager talking about possible problems that end in death. The feigned cheerful Andrei still talked a lot, sometimes joking, but when they went up to the 3rd floor, he became serious and stopped. "What I'm about to say must remain between you and me. You can consider that you have already taken office. And this is just one of the secrets of our hotel." And after a pause he continued, "Do you believe in the paranormal? Although the answer does not matter. It is." Then Andrei pointed his finger at the black door at number 33. "A few years ago a sad incident happened in our hotel. One of the regular customers hanged herself in the room. This came as a real shock to us. But nothing can be done. The number has been removed. The hype was avoided, but when the new guests were settled on the very first evening they complained about the presence of the ghost of the deceased. The phantom wheezing swayed on the loop. The room was locked and the windows boarded up. And sometimes you can hear her wheezing or asking for help. But as you understand, it is better not to try to help her. So under no circumstances should you think of mentioning it anywhere. This, in fact, is one of the main secrets of Eden." "Understood." Eugene nodded several times. "That is great. And that's all for today. finished with the introduction. "I'll wait for you tomorrow after 9 in the evening." By the appointed time, Eugene appeared at the hotel. He did not leave the feeling of anxiety, feeling something wrong and false. But remembering the promised money, he drove all doubts away. The guests did not particularly advertise themselves and tried to settle in the room as soon as possible. Immediately closed the door behind them. On the very first day, the guy recognized in an inconspicuous man in black glasses a famous deputy calling for the preservation of family values, and in his companion an equally famous Instagrammer who became famous in a series of sex scandals. Both were married to other people. The student also noticed a couple of times brightly painted girls in short skirts accompanied by a certain gloomy dork. He brought them, and after a while he took them. What profession the ladies belonged to would not have been guessed only by a person completely detached from modern life. But these cases did not concern him, and even more so, a contract is a contract. At 2 o'clock in the morning, Eugene once again advanced to the detour, and already at the exit from the 3rd floor, a strange sound attracted his attention. The guy stopped. The sound was repeated. Or rather, knock. A series of brief and barely audible thumps came from behind closed room number 33. And then the young man remembered what Andrei had told him yesterday. "My heart went cold, and a lump stuck in my throat." Shinya, not moving, stood for about 3 minutes, and as soon as he wanted to continue on his way, the knocking repeated, but louder. Taking a deep breath, the student quickened his pace. He had no desire to approach the door. The next round was planned in an hour, but despite all the excitement, Eugene no longer heard knocks from room 33. All day, the student was nodding off in class and even managed to catch a few comments from the teachers. But he needed money more than ever. A medical education costs a lot. He promised himself that he would work only a month, a maximum of 2, and then, having raised the jackpot, he would leave the hotel and study closely. Heading to the hotel, Eugene involuntarily raised his eyes to the 3rd floor and stopped for a moment. He immediately recognized the window of the accursed room. Shuttered from the inside, it had a massive black grille on the outside. Strange precautions against jousting, Zhenya thought. But as usual, having driven away doubts, the young man continued on his way and soon set to work. With the onset of night, Eugene became more and more uneasy. Every time he had to go around the 3rd floor, he involuntarily quickened his pace. The student also drew attention to the absence of guests in neighboring rooms. Neither in the 32 nor in the no one lived, and there was no armor. Most likely no one wanted to rent a room next door to a ghost. But the deceased did not show herself. Eugene, having relaxed, went into his thoughts and walked serenely along the dim corridors of Eden. But at 5 in the morning, everything changed. No longer expecting a dirty trick, Evgeny caught up with room 33, and then they hit the door from the inside. Shenya, screaming, jumped up on the spot and stopped. A few seconds later, the blow was repeated. And at that moment, overpowering fear, the guy, not realizing his actions, took a step towards the room and, putting his ear up, listened. A dry, intermittent wheeze and incomprehensible words reached him, causing his body to goosebumps and his heart to speed up the beat. He screamed again, recoiled from the door, and stumbled on the burgundy path, gently fell. And again a knock, but more insistent. Something inside knew that there was someone behind the door. And that something wanted to come out. Eugene quickly got up, almost running, rushed away from the floor, sometimes looking back at the door. The knock didn't stop. The frightened guy stopped hearing him only on the 1st floor. 2 days later, struggling with excitement, Zhenya still went to work. Who on the weekend served as his replacement, he did not know. This was also one of the terms of the non-disclosure agreement. But this time, Eugene decided not to flee, but on the contrary to listen and even perhaps ask a question to the ghost outside the door. Curiosity tormented him. And as such, there was no ban on communication. You can't just open the door. The deceased did not manifest herself until 3 in the morning. Every time Shenya came up to room 33, he listened and slowed down. Finally, a soft knock echoed through the third floor. Although the guy set himself up for several days, the feeling of fear took its toll, and almost succumbing to panic, he approached the number and barely audibly said, "Who is there?" The student stupidly asked with fright and put his ear to the ebony. "Help me, Pumaji." An exhalation came jerkily from behind the door. Eugene, overpowering the cry, recoiled, but after a couple of seconds he leaned over and looked through the keyhole. And a loud frightened scream deafened all 3 floors of the hotel. From the other side, a thin and pale blonde was looking at him. The blurred look of the woman's blue eyes was covered with an unnatural dead veil, and blood oozed profusely from the torn mouth. Pushing off with his feet, Shenya crawled to the wall, while still looking at the girl. The guy saw how the silhouette on all 4s approached the door and, moaning, began to weakly knock on it. Her hoarse voice begged to be released. Called for help. He begged her to open the door. Yevgeny jumped up from the floor and, turning towards the exit from the floor, again screamed in fright, but not from horror, but from surprise. Andrei, flushed with rage, looked at him from under his brows. The strong man's lips moved, and making an evil grimace, the man, as if rapping out the words, spoke, "What are you doing, idiot? Are you tired of living?" The manager shouted, almost hissing with anger, "If this creature breaks out, we are all finished. And first of all to you." Andrei got personal. And pulling with force by the sleeve, he added, "March. Let's talk below." A little later, despite the expectations of the scandal, the manager spoke kindly to Eugene. And in a fatherly way. He said that the bars are not just standing on the windows. The ghost had already crossed the threshold of the room once, taking advantage of the gullibility of the former assistant. And in the morning the guy was found strangled. The embittered dead woman tried to kill everyone who her dead hands would reach. Further, Andrei once again warned Zhenya not to tell anyone about this, referring to the confidentiality contract. Moreover, Mikhail Ivanovich has his connections everywhere, and it will not be difficult to hide the loss of another student. Having issued the first and last warning, the man asked to be careful when going around the 3rd floor. The ghost remembered him, which means that he will try to get out by any means. At night Shenya was tormented by nightmares. In a dream, he saw a dead girl, but her broken neck was not pulled together by a noose. She just crawled on all 4s. Spitting up thick blood. She begged to be let out. She asked her to help. And then she pulled icy dead hands to his throat. And choked. When he woke up screaming and, having calmed down, returned to sleep. The nightmare was repeated. And so all night. In the evening Zhenya was waiting for work. He decided to minimize attention to number 33. Making his rounds, he quickened his pace next to the accursed room. And the ghost seemed to feel it. As soon as the 2nd hour of the night had passed, the knocking was repeated, but already much quieter. As if trying not to scare the guy. Also, through pleas for help and requests to let her out, the guy began to distinguish a quiet, barely audible cry. But even though fear mixed with pity settled in Yevgeny's soul, he perfectly understood the danger of breaking the rules. He didn't want the ghost of a suicide to strangle him. And so, by passing the 3rd floor, he simply quickened his pace next to room 33. For 2 weeks Eugene was tormented by nightmares. He saw a girl who was choking him, begging for help. And on the shift, he quickened his pace next to the damned number. Every day the knocking became quieter and the pleas eventually disappeared altogether. At the beginning of the 3rd week, the ghost fell silent for 2 shifts. By that time, the student was already accustomed to knocking and pleading. But soon the deceased appeared again. For the 2nd night in a row, she moaned exhaustedly and seemed to be walking, monotonously shuffling her legs. Well, closer to morning, already on the last round, noise and screams were heard, but not from the accursed room, but from the hotel lobby. Their building, having taken out the door, was taken by storm by sub. Putting everyone face down on the floor, Evgeny, who did not understand anything, was dragged to the third floor by force, and the door was opened in front of him. Behind her was the corpse of a young girl. According to preliminary data, the victim died of starvation about 5 days ago. At the trial, everything secretly became clear. The owners of the hotel, Mikhail Ivanovich, caught his young and cheerful wife cheating. He released the man, but decided to deal with his wife. Having entered into a criminal conspiracy with their deputy Andrei Shapin, they first beat the girl and then, having previously broken her legs, cut off the tip of her tongue. That is why her speech was slurred. Having locked the victim in room, she was starved, kept on drugs, which they forced to use in huge quantities every morning and evening. Being in a constant dope, the unfortunate woman came to her senses only at night, and even then only partially. It is clear that no suicide and murdered assistant did not exist. It is not known what hoping for. The criminal company made a stupid plan to hire a young student as a night guard, and then blame him for the death of Yulia, throwing him the keys to the room. And oddly enough, the plan didn't work. The owner of the hotel and his assistant received 17 years of strict regime. Neither connections nor money helped. Eugene was sentenced for complicity 4.5 years. But thanks to an appeal and a competent lawyer, the charges were dropped and the young man was fully acquitted. But he was tormented by only 2 questions: if the girl died 5 days before the detention, then who was moaning outside the door. Apparently, in the room at number 33, a ghost did indeed appear, but not of a fictional suicide, but of an unfaithful wife tortured by hunger.